on, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to start by saying I think the issues around this bill, which backdrop this bill, have been very well canvassed. I've got to say, though, that sometimes one wonders if we in this House are really in touch with the reality, the effects at the coalface on the matters of which we're discussing. And I have to think, I say that because a couple of the speeches I heard from the government side would have everyone believe that, oh, there was a little problem and there was a court case and the Crown essentially lost, or the Auckland City Council lost, and so we've got the bill before us now and we've tidied it all up and it's all better and it's all going to be fine and we're all going to vote in favour of this, so it's all sweet, it's all great, and there's not a problem. So I think it's probably a good thing to touch on a couple of issues. I will talk about a property in Onehunga, which is a complex which has 25 owners. That property was built in 2000, and it was built at a time when the market was deregulated, when the building standards and the building codes changed under the government of the day, and we know the problems from the Select Committee that where these eaves weren't built, we had Mediterranean-type houses and complexes built, where the building code changed and where the council responsible signed off on the work. But that problem has not gone away for those 25 owners today. Today, as I speak, there are some young couples listening to this debate right now because they are still embroiled in the legal actions trying to get the work started. I mean, 16 years later, they're now starting the work on it, and this legislation will enable that work to go ahead.
Well, I want to thank the member for the assurance at the end there. I got the impression that he was talking about something not in the bill.
This legislation is good in the sense that this work will go ahead. But we need to remind ourselves that this is not a simple matter. There are human lives here involved. There are people who separated through the stress while all of these court actions have taken place, and this has dragged on getting to Select Committee and dragged on getting out and dragged on getting to third reading. Couples have separated. Couples have divorced. And we need to remind ourselves that those matrimonial settlements still haven't been settled because this legislation has not been completed. So couples who might have separated 5 years ago, 2 years ago, are still unable to settle themselves with respect to the property that they jointly own because of this. This is not a small thing. People have left the country. People living in this particular block in Onehunga, actually, some of those owners were scared, and I'm just getting some text through on the matter right now. Some of those owners were scared into selling their properties for ridiculous money, $100,000. You can be free of all the stress. You don't have to carry the mortgage. Quit it, sell now, and be shot of it. Other couples have had to carry 2 mortgages over all of this time. 16 years of carrying 2 mortgages. This is not a small thing, I would say to the national MPs who stood up and sort of, oh, it's okay, we're passing the legislation. 16 years of carrying 2 mortgages, of the stress of marriage, some causing marriage breakdown, some not being concluded because one of the partners has died in the process. People not able to get on with their lives. 16 years later, we're now passing this legislation in the House. The whole issue of work being done, signed off by the council, changing the requirements, owners doing work only to find that that work should not have been done, actually, and therefore they can't get the 25%, not eligible for the 25%. People who can't actually raise the first 25%, and under the current rules and legislation, everyone on the body corp has to sign off. 3 people hold it up. It requires those remaining owners to go for a Section 74 to actually get control of the situation. So we passed this legislation, but that ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, is not the end of the matter for some people out there. So any MP in Auckland right now, think of these people in this complex in Onehunga, think that for them this journey is just going to start now. It's going to take 23, I'm told, 26 to 32 weeks to complete the work in this complex. And in that time, these people are going to have to move out. And they're going to have to fund all this themselves. And we can sit here and pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, we've done wonderful work. We've done wonderful work. We've passed legislation. It's all going to be better. Take a little pill. It's all going to be fine. It is not fine. And we need to remember that when we pass legislation such as that which occurred in the deregulation of the market, which actually led to this situation, which has resulted in this piece of legislation being before the House, there are downstream consequences for people, young couples with babies, young couples who have struggled with the health issues of living in a mouldy home for 16 years, whilst at the same time lawyers have argued and battled to get them the right to have the compensation that this House now says that they are entitled to. I just want to send a little message to the government. Don't get so cocky and confident that everything that one is doing is fine and that there's no human consequence. None of us sitting here tonight will have any idea of the long-term consequences on the health of those children raised in those houses in this complex in particular, for the last 16 years of living in a property, in an apartment that was mouldy. None of us will understand that. But we'll all pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, it's great, we've got free healthcare for children under 13. They'll be right, mate. We're looking after them. Well, it ain't right. Haven't been looking after them. Parliament has failed them. Successive governments over the time has failed them. The only people that actually have done them a good service is the court and the ruling handed down by the Supreme Court and the select committee process in the last few months. We would do well to remind ourselves that at the end of legislation are human beings, people, not something to be laughed about. Mr. Jamie Lee, it's serious. Human beings and children in leaky homes full of mould. Young couples who struggle to pay the mortgage on a property that's devalued, for which they cannot get a loan on because the value of the place has plummeted because it's a leaky home. Young couples who have to take on extra work because now they've had to move into another place where they are able to bring up their children in a healthy environment, but they're still carrying the two mortgages, one of the leaky property, which hopefully will now get fixed, and two of the home that they are living in and raising their children in. 16 years? And this is a success? 16 years and Parliament sits here and congratulates itself, pats itself on the back? Yeah, right. Mr. Speaker, good to finally see this legislation passed tonight. And if we get to lift early and all go home and feel comfortable like that, we'll whoop-de-doo. But I just want this House to remember that in a complex in Onehunga, 25 apartments, there are young people right now whose journey is only just beginning.